Welcome back to TVRD. This week on the vlog, I'm going to be delving back into the stalling issue on this 2020 S1000XR. Also, we're going to be hitting on a couple of major news stories in the motorcycling world this past week to 2 weeks, and we're going to get into all that. Before I do so, I want to say welcome back to all the subscribers of TVRD, and welcome to anybody new who's coming across this channel for the first time. Your support is always greatly appreciated. I ask that you chime in the comments section below, and if you are so inclined, please consider clicking on that notification bell and subscribe button. That support is always greatly appreciated. So I want to start off talking about the stalling issue on this 2020 BMW S1000XR. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I'm going to link a video right here in the video. I'll also post a link to it in the description for this video that I shot last fall, kind of going over the issue. And you'll be able to see in that video, about 5 or 6 minutes into the video, I do a montage of the bike stalling in the situation as described. But in short, what was happening with the bike was that pretty much not any time, that's the problem, is it was inconsistent, but it would stall when you would pull the clutch in. So if you would pull the clutch in approaching a stop sign, pull the clutch in to downshift from 4th to 3rd gear, there was no discernible pattern. I could make the bike not do it by slowly engaging the clutch through the friction zone, but if you were just to pull the clutch all the way in like you typically would, it would stall, and it was a nuisance, and really truthfully kind of a safety hazard, especially if it catches you off guard or happens in an intersection. We certainly don't need our bike stalling. Now, my situation resolved itself, and I've actually had this be the case in the past on another bike. My brother had this situation on a bike that he owned where after break-in, similar sort of issue went away. My suspicion at the time was that it was a fuel mapping issue, and I still believe that to be the case. So why am I bringing this back up? Has the problem resurfaced on my bike? The answer to that question is no. However, I posted to the owners forum last fall when this was going on, and when I did my video, there's quite a few comments of other owners saying, hey, you know, my bike's doing the same thing. What I noticed was, I suspected that one of two things remedied my problem. It was that the bike was either properly run in at about 1,500 or 2,000 miles and the situation kind of sorted itself, or by the time I had that mileage on the bike, the higher temperatures of summer had kind of faded away. And so what's happening now is some of the folks are posting on the message board. They're a little bit further down south. I got a guy in Florida who had posted saying, hey, you know, it's been properly hot here, and this situation has come back up. And that was a hypothesis that I had for myself too, thinking when it gets properly hot here, I might run back into this problem. It is not properly hot yet. Today is beautiful. It is 66 degrees. But I have not had this stalling issue since I last filmed a vlog about it. But I am curious to see if it resurfaces in the summer. I was optimistic that it wouldn't, but I'm not so optimistic anymore, knowing that there's other people out there who, now that the weather is turning warmer where they live, are having this problem again. So I'm going to be reporting back on it and continuing to post updates, because that's a pretty big issue. I'm going to try to get it sorted and work through BMW if it does resurface. I'm going to provide them some footage as to what's going on and see what we can do to get it resolved. I still think it's a fuel mapping issue, and trying to get fuel mapping done at the dealership is always questionable based off of the parameters that the manufacturer puts out. But we'll cross that bridge if and when we get there. I'm hopeful I don't have to, but I have a sneaking suspicion that that stalling issue is going to resurface its ugly head. Let's take a quick left turn here, and then we'll get into the news of the day, or I should say the news of the last 2 weeks, if you will, in terms of motorcycling. Whee! Alright, so yeah, some interesting news coming out in the motorcycling world if you've been paying attention. I'm going to start with Ducati and what has come out of the Ducati manufacturer as of late that is maybe some interest in the motorcycling world, is that their new flagship, their V4 Multistrada, well, the fun's over for some of those owners. It's been recalled. a recall that affects, in North America, some 60 units. So that's not a huge recall, but I have a feeling that the reason it's only affecting 60 units primarily is because that's what's been sold out of the impacted lot. And what's going on? Well, they're recalling those units and they're doing a full engine swap. Yep, you heard that right. A full engine swap. Something to do, and I can't recall as I'm driving down the road here, but something to do with the valve. Yeah, I don't know exactly what it was. Some component of the valves that is wearing too quickly and ultimately could lead to engine failure. Long story short. So long story short, it sounds like the affected parts, there's two places where they were manufactured. I think one was Germany, the other was Japan. It sounds like the impacted units were coming from Japan. So there's 44 of those bikes were impacted in the United States that have already been sold. And so those are going to be recalled. They're actually issuing a stop ride order, and the engines themselves are going to be, the replacement engines are being built in Bologna, and they're going to swap those engines out. That's a pretty big deal, especially if you just drop that amount of coin on that beautiful multistrada. And I think Ducati recognizes this, because in addition to recalling those and making that repair, they are going to compensate those owners. They're going to do all three, from my understanding. They're going to give them, let's see if I can recall, they're going to give them $1,500 to spend on official Ducati accessories and merchandise. They're going to upgrade the radar software and add the radar software and system if those bikes are not equipped with it, which is about $850 plus labor. And they're also going to provide 2 years of free annual maintenance, free of charge, which all that sounds great. However, I don't know how long those bikes are going to take to be repaired. I'm going to guess it's going to take some time. And that means that those riders are going to be without their brand new expensive bike. My hope is that they'll provide them with some sort of loaner, but I don't know if that's going to be dealer specific or not. Either way, kind of a raw deal. And a lot of us don't buy new model year bikes for that reason, because there's usually some sort of flies in the ointment to iron out, says the guy riding the S1000XR of the 2020 Persuasion, which was a new upgrade over the 2019. So I didn't take my own advice, but I haven't had too many issues, although there were those recalls I had mentioned, but they were pretty easily sorted, and I waited while those were addressed. Now, other interesting motorcycling news out of Montana, who recently passed a lane filtering legislation. If memory serves me correct, I think that makes Montana only the third state in the United States that has some sort of law on the books making lane filtering legal. We all know about California, Utah has a law, and then there's Montana. Montana's a bit more restrictive in terms of their speed guidelines, but nonetheless, it's a hugely positive thing if you are a motorcyclist. The only thing that moves slower than the traffic jams we often find ourselves stuck in is the legislative process in this country, especially related to anything that's going to benefit motorcycles, it seems. So the lane filtering legislation in Montana, I think, is a win overall. It's nice to see. There's some legislation in different state houses across the country. I know Maryland gets it brought up every year, but it never gets much attention. It never seems to get passed, unfortunately. I think the Montana law basically says that you can only filter at a certain speed. I think you got to be within like 20 miles an hour, or traffic has to be stopped, and you can only be going 10 over. There can be like a 20 mile an hour difference or something to that effect. But basically, it's for filtering up at lights or through traffic jams. And for me, that would be welcome legislation to pass around these parts in Maryland, DC, Virginia area with all the heinous traffic that we have. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Always catches my attention when I see lane filtering legislation getting passed. And a final bit of news, unless you live under a rock, MotoGP just started officially in terms of having their first race this past weekend. So what's new in MotoGP? Well, I guess it depends on how you want to slice the storyline, but for me, it's kind of more of the same of last year, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. With Marc Marquez sidelined, pretty much it is an open field, and it certainly shows you, as much as I think some people will harp on Marquez for being a Honda-only rider, and I will admit I'd like to see him switch manufacturers at some point here in the career and see what he does on another machine. People aren't riding that Honda to the front like he was consistently. And while Marc is away, it pretty much opens up the entire field. So we learned a couple of things this past weekend, and that is that the Ducatis are still insanely fast. In fact, they set a record for top speed. I forget what it was in kilometers per hour, something like 363. I know it was just a little over 225 miles per hour, which is really ridiculously fast on a motorcycle. Especially when you consider all the aerodynamic factors that are at play. But what else did we learn? Well, Ducatis are still really stupidly fast in a straight line, but that did not guarantee them a win. They likely should have won that race considering how they were qualifying and how fast they were. But, much like in boxing, it's sometimes not the most powerful person to win the match, or in this case the Yamaha, not the most powerful bike, but Maverick Vinales was able to pilot it to victory, and I think we're going to see a pretty open contest across MotoGP this year. It'll be interesting to see if Marquez can get fit. I think if he can get fit, it's probably still his championship to win, even though he missed his opening 2 races. He's that consistently good. If he comes back anywhere near the form that he was in when he had to go out, if last year's any indication, if he can be that consistent, he'll be up there, even with some of these missed races. Speaking of consistent, the returning champ, if you will, Joan Mir, he got pipped at the line there at the end by those Ducatis because they're so fast. I mean, truthfully, he probably should have had second, but once again, we see how fast those ducks are in a straight line, if you will, and they got him to the line. But he's going to be consistent. I think he showed, if anything, I want to say he started, I can't recall, somewhere like 10th position, ended up finishing 4th, really probably should have been on the podium, but if it wasn't for the speed of those Ducatis in a straight line at the end of the race, but he's going to be consistent, race in and race out. So I think he'll offer up some form of defense of his title. Ducatis are going to continue to be fast in a straight line, but they've got some issues to work out. Same thing with Yamaha. So all in all, I think it's going to look a lot like last year. We're going to have a bunch of different race winners, and that's all right. It always leads to some super exciting racing. So if you're not watching MotoGP or you've never watched it, tune in, give it a chance. Super exciting. I think you'll enjoy it. Well, that is pretty much going to do it for this week on TBRD. I appreciate you tuning in. As always, if you're so inclined, please consider hitting that notification bell and subscribe button, and make sure to drop me a comment, whether it's related to the S1000XR stalling issue, which we got into earlier, and I will certainly be updating as the summer gets closer, or about any of that motorcycling news. As I like to say, until next time, keep the throttle back, keep the rubber down, enjoy the ride.